Considering 71% of Earth's surface is covered in water, it's not surprising that the depths often hide some perplexing secrets. Some submerged locations conceal secrets from the forgotten past. Some have bizarre, fascinating backstories, while others are just plain creepy. I'll be covering all the bases in this deep dive down into some seriously mysterious locations submerged underwater. Number 20. Car Cave. Deep within a partially flooded abandoned slate mine in Ceredigion, Wales, there lies a cavernous room filled with eerie blue water. This cave is the final resting place for dozens of abandoned cars and other oddities, all stacked as high as the eye can see. No one's certain how the cars ended up in the old slate mine, but theories range from sinkholes to criminals ditching stolen vehicles. The most likely possibility, however, is the most disappointing. The cave was probably just a dumping ground for locals before environmental responsibility became a hot topic. Despite the strangely beautiful appearance it's taken on today, the idea of being stuck down there alone gives me the shivers. Number 19. The Lost Villages. If you ever venture out for a leisurely swim in the St. Lawrence Seaway in Canada, you'd probably be shocked to find out that 9 villages lurk below the surface. In the 1950s, these villages were abandoned and submerged in the process of constructing a hydroelectric dam in the area. 6,500 people were relocated and entire houses were transported out of the area on colossal machines, but much of the village's infrastructure was left behind. These underwater ghost towns are now collectively known as the Lost Villages and are a popular destination for divers. Number 18. SS American Star. This abandoned ocean liner, constructed in 1940, saw over half a century of cruises before it met its disastrous fate. After being retired as a cruise liner in 1994, the ship was off to Asia to start a new life as a 5-star floating hotel. But while it was being towed to the Far East, a storm broke out. The tow line snapped and the ship ran aground off the coast of Fuerteventura. While stuck, the pounding Atlantic surf snapped the bow of the ship in two, and the American Star was left to rust. In the years that followed, the rusted ship collapsed and sunk deeper into the Atlantic. Now the only thing that remains visible is its bow, parts of which can be still seen during low tide. The rest of it continues to rust underneath the waves. Number 17. Cold War Bomb Shelter. Somewhere in the heart of rural Russia lies an abandoned bomb shelter that can trace its origins back to the 1950s. Originally built during the Cold War as protection against nuclear threats, this empty base could quite easily be given a second life as a setting for a horror movie. It's all partially submerged underwater and incredibly creepy. The water level has slowly lowered over time, leaving an ominous coating of rust on most of the metal surfaces inside. The water is unusually clear, so at least you'll be able to see any monsters coming before they have a chance to grab your ankles and drag you under. Number 16. Soviet Statues. Staying in the former USSR, I present to you the Drowned Soviets, found off the coast of Crimea. Originally lowered into the Black Sea to be kept safe from vandals and thieves after the collapse of the USSR, these stone Soviet leaders have formed distinctive marine artifacts there ever since. They're now used more as underwater tourist attractions than for striking fear and obedience into the hearts of the USSR subjects and enemies of the state. But submerged Stalin certainly still has an intimidation factor. Number 15. Jesus. You've probably heard of Christ the Redeemer, the enormous statue that looks out across Rio de Janeiro, but have you heard of Christ of the Sailors, who looks out across the sandy bottom of the Mediterranean? This 10-foot-tall statue of the son of the Christian God was built in 1990 and blessed by Pope John Paul II before being thrown into the ocean. It now stands just over a mile off the coast of Malta, acting as a spiritual guide for wayward sea captains and an awesome attraction for scuba divers. So much for Jesus walking on water rather than underwater. Number 14. Underwater Planes. If you're into airplanes and also a fan of scuba diving, then boy do I have the location for you. Located off the coast of Aruba in the Caribbean Sea lie 2 airplanes who seem to have decided to swap the air for the water. The first plane is your typical run-of-the-mill decommissioned passenger plane, but the second aircraft was in fact confiscated after a drug bust in the 1980s. Both planes were intentionally sunk to create artificial reefs and now act as a home for all varieties of aquatic life. Number 13. Tank Graveyard. Off the coast of Donegal, Ireland, submerged in the depths of the North Atlantic Ocean, there lies a graveyard. For tanks. How did they get there, you ask? Well, they certainly didn't take a wrong turn off the beach, that's for sure. Tanks have been rotting underwater since 1944 when the American ship that was transporting them was struck by a German torpedo during the Second World War. The ship sunk along with all of its military cargo, never to be recovered. These once powerful machines have been left to a lonely, watery fate ever since and make for a truly surreal and unexpected sight for divers. Number 12. Caelin. The rural Welsh community of Caelin and the valley it inhabited were flooded in 1965 to form the Caelin Reservoir. The reservoir would go on to provide water for industry in the nearby towns of Liverpool and Wirral, but the 48 residents of one of Wales' last Welsh-only speaking communities lost their homes in the process, sparking outrage across the country. Houses, farms, and a cemetery were among the landmarks submerged and all remain at the bottom of the reservoir today. Number 11. Massive knife. This enormous knife, found on the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, is thought to have belonged to an extinct subspecies of Homo sapiens that grew up to 15 feet tall. I'm joking, of course. It's actually the rusted remains of a boat's rudder, but you could probably still cut a steak with it if you tried hard enough. The divers who discovered it must have been horrified at how careless King Kong is with his cutlery. Number 10. Lake Minnewanka. This beautiful Canadian lake conceals the remains of Minnewanka Landing, a summer resort that was relatively popular up until 1941. That year, to provide hydroelectric power to the surrounding areas in the form of a dam, the water level of the resort town's lake was raised by 100 feet. Despite being submerged underwater, buildings and fences can still be seen if you dive deep enough. I wouldn't bet on any of the shops still being open though. Number 9. Washington's flooded mine. If you get lost while exploring the woods of North Washington, you may stumble across the Winlock Copper Mine. The mine has been abandoned for almost a century, and many of its chambers were flooded when it closed, making for some haunting sights. The eerie blue water gets its coloration from the copper still present in the mine shafts below. Just thinking about the dark depths and jagged metal down there makes me want to steer well clear of this place. But if that's your kind of thing, be sure to take a camera with you if you ever visit. Watching from the safety of my desk chair is enough for me. Number 8. Antarctic Yacht. If you're ever planning a trip to the Antarctic, I'd suggest checking the weather forecast for any incoming storms before you go. The weather gets completely crazy in the Earth's southernmost reaches, and Brazilian journalist João Lara Mesquita and his crew learned this the hard way. They took Mesquita's yacht, the Mar Sem Fem, to the South Pole in 2012 in an ill-fated journey. A storm descended, throwing the boat around in 100-mile-per-hour winds, and it ended up trapped in the ice. While the crew were rescued, the ship was overcome by the surrounding ice, which filled the hole and expanded, cracking it open and sinking it into the depths. The boat was retrieved in 2013, but the year-long ice bath made the repair bill cost almost as much as the yacht itself. Number 7. Florida Man. Drowning is a common fear among those averse to the water, and justifiably so. But this is sadly what seems to have happened to a man in Florida whose skeleton was found locked inside his car at the bottom of a lake. The man had been missing since 1997, but thanks to the marvel that is Google Maps, his final resting place was finally uncovered in 2019 when a resident viewed the area from above. The resident spotted the car in the lake, which was invisible from the lake shore. The missing man was finally recovered and laying to rest, but I can't help wondering what other creepy submerged discoveries are waiting to be made on Google Maps. Number 6. Oil rigs. To the common person, these gigantic offshore sites are terrifying, awe-inspiring, and mysterious all at once. Standing as tall as 4,700 feet from the seabed to the top of the platform, these titans of the sea are among the tallest things humans have ever built. This is what they look like before they're sunk, and this is what the enormous legs are like inside. Imagine casually minding your own business while scuba diving, only for the legs of one of these colossal structures to come looming out of the blue at you, looking like something out of War of the Worlds. Ugh. Number 5. Strip Club. Located in the Red Sea off the coast of Israel, Nymphes Show Bar was a bizarre underwater strip club that shut down a few years back. Divers often swim around the outside, peeping in at the interior, which remains dry for now. The locked entrance is above water, but as the abandoned building falls into disrepair, the water is bound to get in sooner or later. When it floods, we could end up with the world's first pole dancing starfish. Number 4. Underwater Farm. These submerged oddities found along the northern Italian coast are being used as underwater fruit and vegetable farms. The open-bottom transparent bells allow the plants to stay at a constant temperature, while the seawater evaporates into fresh water inside, keeping the plants hydrated. It all began as a question of whether it could be done, and now that the project's been successful, it could open new avenues for future farming. Number 3. Structure at Kubu Lake. You'd be forgiven for thinking this was the semi-submerged hull of an alien spacecraft, but the reality is admittedly more terrestrial. It's actually a specialized type of enclosed monitoring pool connected up to a larger dam that analyzes water at Lac de Kubu in southern France. A huge number of factors like the flow rate, chemical composition, and varying depth of the lake's water are monitored within the pool and the chambers submerged below it. All of this information is analyzed and used to calculate things like rainfall, flood probability, and the cleanliness of the water that flows downstream into the surrounding areas. That's just as cool as aliens, right? Number 2. Miniature Village. These underwater buildings were constructed in 1965 and reside 100 feet under the sea off the coast of Antibes. But these buildings aren't as big as they look at first, as they're actually a model village. The miniature settlement was built for the French movie L'Enfant et la Sirène, or The Child and the Mermaid. Not heard of it? That's because, thanks to a difficult production process, the film never ended up getting made. The only thing that remains from the ill-fated production is this tiny underwater village that fish and crabs now call home. Before I get to the number 1 spot, this Parisian water reservoir deserves an honorable mention. While it may not be mysterious, it's certainly a haunting sight, and the railings on the left put its size into perspective. Who'd have thought drinking water could look so cool? Number 1. Xichang. This incredible location is the ancient city of Xichang, submerged at the bottom of Lake Qandao in China. Originally built during the Eastern Han Dynasty almost 2,000 years ago, the city has been submerged underwater ever since a hydroelectric dam was constructed there in 1959. Statues, stairways, and buildings, all intricately carved with snarling lions and ancient geometry, lay untouched to this day, 131 feet deep in the lake. Despite its age and the decades underwater, it's in fantastic condition, making it a popular destination for divers and undoubtedly one of the most amazing submerged oddities in the world.